Hello, this is a screencast that's just going to go over how to create some trends for reduced electrode sets. In this case, we're going to be creating or modifying some trends that were created for trending neonatal EEG, just using amplitude integrated EEG primarily, and some other frequency-based trends and rhythmicity-based trends. And what we're going to do is we're going to modify those trends and apply them to a reduced electrode set of FP1 to P3, FP2 to P4, just a two-channel AEEG from a complete neonatal application. And so I've got a couple of neonatal recordings here that we're going to use for that and talk about some technical issues that are important to keep in mind. My name is Michael Guess. I'm the VP of Research and Clinical Applications for Persyst Development. And as always, Persyst 13 that we'll be showing and Persyst 14 that'll be coming soon. Those are CE mark, Canadian Medical Device, CMD, FDA 510K medical devices, and as such, we always recommend selecting the question mark or, well, that's on the system button bar. Let's go ahead and just get started with that. I'm going to open up a recording, and on the system button bar at the bottom of that, right over here, there's that question mark that says help. What it does is it opens the user guide, and we always recommend that people go ahead and take a look and check out the indications for use and the warnings on any medical device. There's a lot of valuable information in there about what Persyst does. And so this isn't intended to replace that or the user manual or training. It's a guide for how to make some adjustments to the software for a particular application. Having said that, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now you can see that right away that this recording has a reduced electrode set. In fact, with this one, if we go from the bipolar montage to the recorded montage, something important to keep in mind is that I'll go ahead and turn artifact reduction off in this case, that these are the channels that were recorded from the amplifier to the file that was being acquired onto the drive. And this one does not include P3 and P4. So, we don't really, there's a 1A to ref, but really all the channels that are coming are recording EEG in one way or another. So let's go ahead and close this and take a look at another recording that exhibits a very common thing. It's not necessarily a problem, but it is something to be aware of, and that the thing to be aware of is you could be looking at a recording that has, let me go ahead and click forward in this on the trends, that has a neonatal bipolar double distance electrode configuration. And yet what's being recorded to the drive is the full 1020, if not more than that. Let's go to the recorded montage, and we'll see that there's a lot of unused channels here. And so it's very common that you'll be viewing a subset of channels in your neonatal montage. However, the amplifier, through the acquisition software, is recording the full set of electrodes. And normally that's not an issue to think about, but something there is to think about is that Persyst will look at all of the channels coming in if it's told to. And that has to do with the configuration of the trends in the trending montage. And so if we go ahead and go to the trending montage, in this case, we're going to go to trend, neo, BP, and ref. And we'll talk about what a trending montage is. Well, all of these channels have EEG on them, so we're okay there. But notice that when we're looking at neonatal recordings, normally we're talking about greater interelectrode distances, fewer electrodes, and that all comes down to something that has to do with artifact reduction insofar as we're talking about bad electrode detection. So there's two things going on. One is in a neonatal recording, it's not terribly unusual for a lot of channels to be recorded that are unused, that are open to the air, and that neonatal seizures can be quite focal in nature. And so for that reason, Persyst has a couple of things that it can do. So if we go to Trend Preferences here, and we go over to the Channels tab, just something to keep in mind, there's a Use Impedance Measurements for Electrode Quality Analysis. What that does is, on systems that support it, it will use the initial impedance check to say, hey, these things are not being used. Go ahead and disable them. Don't look at them for bad electrode detection, things like that. So an important thing to keep in mind is, one, the impedance check has to be performed, and two, Persyst has to be able to read that impedance check for that file format. So in general, it is a good idea not to record channels that are unused. Failing that, though, It's not a bad thing. It's just that we're going to configure our trends to use only the channels that are in use. And one of the things that we can do to deal with, one, the focal nature of neonatal EEG seizures, and also the fact that it's an unpredictable recording environment. In fact, when you have open pins on an amplifier, they can record noise that looks a lot like EEG, depending on the amplifier, depending on the layer of stuff that may be accumulating on that amplifier, whatever that stuff may be. Many, many years ago, there used to be a term for brainstem auditory evoked responses that were done on amplifiers that weren't connected to anything. And yet you get a good response from them. They called them air bears back in the day. So open amplifier inputs, depending on the amplifier design, can have artifact that looks like EEG. So normally it's not a problem. Normally when the electrodes are on, the impedance check is done, you understand which ones are being applied. But with all that being said, not to get too far off into it, normally Persyst will engage artifact reduction on the trends when you launch the software, and then you turn it off if you want to have it off. And for 1020 recordings or 1010 recordings, that's perfectly fine. But for neonatal recordings where you just have a couple of electrodes, it may not be enough information for the electrode artifact detector to do a reliably good job with that type of recording. So for neonates, what we'll often do is we'll run this registry key that says force raw trends. What that registry key does when we run it is it just means that Persyst will start with artifact reduction turned off on the trends, and the other one will turn it back on. It just sets the default. So Persyst is always calculating it. The only difference is that view, the default view, when you open up the recording. That's it. So with all that preamble being said, let's go ahead and open up some recording. So I'm going to open up a neonatal EEG, and we're going to start just looking at what the default trends are in this for our trend panel, and then we're going to make modifications from there. So let's jump ahead into the recording. Let's go ahead and go to a neonatal bipolar montage. And here we can see some things in the trends, these little blips. And what these are changes in amplitude. So we go from the amplitude looking a bit like this, where it's going from flat to it's discontinuous. And then we go to that seizure. So there's a change in the amplitude of the EEG that is showing up in the amplitude integrated EEG trends. And if we move this forward a bit, we'll see we're doing FP101, FP202, C3, C4. Pretty common channel arrangement. Now remember, we're going to change this channel arrangement to look at FP1, P3, FP2, P4. All right, let's see what else we have here. We have an 11 channel. And when you're doing a full neonatal application, full double distance application of channels, having multiple channels for your AEEG can be helpful because, again, the focal nature of the activity can lend itself to looking at AEEG for each individual channel as opposed to spanning larger areas of the head. And so that can be a helpful way to look at the AEEG. Again, to help if things are more focal, it can stand out a little better in that per channel. There's an AEEG trend set up here that's using an average neo. It's just 3-channel average reference, top of the head. And again, just changing a reference, but again, we're looking at per channel derivations rather than looking at bipolar, we're looking at averages. There's a comprehensive trend panel. This is a take on the panel that's created for the standard configuration within Persyst 13. We have rhythmicity, FFT spectrograms, asymmetry, and AEEG, left and right hemisphere bipolar. And this is not a traditional panel for looking at neonatal EEG, but some things we did do to it to allow a different view to be checked out to see if it's useful is on a adult, pediatric to adult trend panel. You're looking at generally higher frequencies. Neonatal, you're generally looking at lower frequency ranges. And so instead of scaling the rhythmicity spectrogram from 1 to 25 hertz, this one goes from 0 to 10. Same thing for the FFT spectrogram. So everything is scaled lower to help visualize those lower frequencies that are expected. Rhythmicity by channel, same thing. We're looking at individual channels and scaled the same way, 0 to 10 hertz. Whereas the adult panels, they're 1 to 25. An asymmetry trend, there's not a lot of asymmetry in this particular recording, so not a lot to see here, but again, it's laid out by single channels. If we look at this versus baseline comprehensive, kind of interesting here, is this one has a baseline set, and there's a baseline button here, and then these left and right hemisphere versus baseline spectrograms. These are set up to look at changes from the baseline. So increasingly red, higher z-scores, increasingly green, negative z-scores, there's less of it. And where that seizure is, that particular seizure, shows up as a red band in there. It's a change from the background. So that's just an aside for showing what's in that particular panel. We have versus baseline rhythmicity by channel. And again, this is looking at rhythmic components, higher z-scores, lower z-scores. These are ones just to look at different ways of looking at the neonatal EEG. Suppression ratio, again, that's an amplitude measure paired with an AEG, traditional AEG measure, looking at left and right hemisphere laid on top of each other. Blue is left, red is right, and pink is when you have symmetry. But really, the top two are going to be your more traditional trends. The other ones are just different ways of looking at it that may or may not be useful with a particular recording. Traditionally, when looking at neonatal EEG, these 3 or 11 channel AEG trends are the ones that have been used from, in many applications for quite a long time. So this is entirely up to the practitioner as far as what tools they want to use. These are just showing some capabilities within the software. I'm not recommending one over the other, just to be clear on that. AEG is the traditional one that's used quite a bit, though. All right, now that explains what we've got in the existing one. Now we're going to change this trend layout to accommodate the reduced electrode set. Now, one of the things here, remember, we have P3 and P4, they're not being used in this recording, even though they're being recorded, because again, we go back to that recorded montage. We can see that there's channels that aren't being used. If I just change the gain here, easy way to do it. See, there's channels that are just recording noise from the amplifier, just atmospherics, nothing plugged in. Okay, so as long as the channels exist, we can apply trends to them. If we go to the other recording in that folder here, no P3, P4. We can see that in the electrode signal quality, and looking at the recorded trend panel, they simply were recorded to disk. So let's go ahead and set something up using a recording that has those additional channels. Ideally, you want to do this with a recording from the system. This will give you a start, and then if you need to make adjustments from there, that's perfectly fine. So to get started, let's go back to our trending montage. And how do we find out what the trending montage is? We'll go to Preferences and Trend Preferences. And if we go to Channels here, this is the Neo BP and Ref. That's the montage that was used to trend this. And actually, I'm going to clear these trends. So that's showing what this was originally trended with. And so let's go ahead and we're going to use this trend Neo BP and Ref. So if we click Preferences, Trend Preferences, and we're going to select the template file that we're going to use to modify. We have a Neo Draft P13E. It does not have the adult seizure detector turned on and enabled in this MMX. It does not have the spike detector. It's just these amplitude and frequency trends. So let's go ahead and open this one. I'm going to look at the channels. This one's set to use the trend Neo BP and Ref. This is the trending montage. Normally, you don't show the trending montage in the montage favorites. For instance, when we go here, we go to montage favorites. I've got them all selected, but this Neo normally wouldn't show the trending montage. And the reason for that is we don't want that to get modified for review. We want to leave that one there just to tell the trending software, the trending part of the software, which channels to do the trending on. Now, when I go to other montages, there it is. So it just keeps it out of that immediate drop down, so there's less temptation to say, oh, this is a good montage, I'm going to change it. Now, this one has a lot of stuff in it. We've got all these bipolar derivations. Some of them span the whole head, FP101, FP202. The rest are double distance, some transverse channels. And we also have these ones that are going to the average Neo. Average Neo, that's not a standard, that's just giving the reference a name. So if we go to edit average reference here, we can see that if we pull this from the drop-down list, those are a couple of hard-coded ones in the software. This one just happens to be an average of C3, CZ, C4. If we show weights, there's a third, each normalize, equalize. Normally you want them to add up to 1. There's some specialized applications we give custom weighting. So this is just an average reference. So we're going to hit done. We don't need to save changes to that one. We'll leave it the way it is, but that just tells you what these are. Because we've got some trends that are set up to show the trends with an average reference. Okay, what do we do next? Well, we're going to modify things. And remember, we wanted to create some trends that had a derivation of FP1 to P3, FP2 to P4. Now, these other channels, it may be just as well to leave these in here. And here's why. Is that it's entirely possible that a place doing two-channel AEEG, sort of cerebral function monitor style of AEEG only, may, for different patients, different neonates, may apply a full double distance neonatal application. And since we're not doing seizure detection or spike detection within this, we can add those additional channel sets. And if you're doing one or the other, you can switch between those. But we'll set the default to be the two-channel AEG. Now, again, importantly, if you've got open amplifier inputs, if you've got two channels on the scalp, 4 electrodes plus a reference, possibly a ground depending on the amplifier, and you switch to a trend panel that has 11 channels, well, if you're not recording them, of course, that's just going to be noise in those trends. So, stating the obvious, but if it's a two-channel EEG, stick to the two-channel trend, and we're going to add one. Actually, the 3-channel, we're going to add another trend panel to this. But before we do that, let's go ahead and look at what we're doing. So now we're going to look at this modify template mode, because when we're going to change a trend, we want to go into modify template. And the reason for that is you can make changes for the current recording for that patient, and it'll be saved with that recording, but it won't apply to anything else. If you want to make changes to the trend template for all the recordings, go ahead and pick the one you want to modify. You can save it under a new name. In fact, I will. And now we're in this modify template mode up here in the upper left. I'm going to show my trend, new, BP, and ref. And I'm going to just click forward in the recording. Now this one, again, is not, it's recording P3 and P4, it just doesn't have any data on it. But I'm just going to hang some trends on it just to get it started. And then I'm going to try this out on a adult recording. Well, teenager probably, but it's an adult recording. It's a full 1020, and it's got some seizures in it, some spike and wave, 3 hertz spike and wave. And we can look at the response of the trends. So you want to use real data to see what's happening there. Okay. After all that preamble, we're in this modified template mode, tools, rather, we go to preferences, trend preferences, general preferences. This is this modify template mode. And so I'm going to be making changes to this file. Neodraft P13E, no CFAM-style. Well, I'm going to make changes. I'm going to save this under a new name. So I'm going to save as, and I can type it in here. I can just browse. Everything is by default in Persyst. The settings are stored in program data Persyst on the C drive. It's a good place to keep things. Windows 7 and Windows 10. Windows 7 is no longer supported, right? But it started with Windows 7, where they started putting settings for programs in a program data folder, which in Windows is normally hidden, but you can just type in a path. You can type in C program data. You'll get to that folder, right? So for you to type this in, even if it's a hidden folder, it takes you to that. You see other programs settings in there. There's Persyst, and we see this new draft. So we're going to modify this. Actually, what I'm going to do is save it under a new name. I'm going to call it Neodraft P13E, and I'm going to call it P3 FP12 P34. So you can name these whatever you like. I'm just giving it something moderately descriptive. Okay, save. And there's the name, shows up there. Hit save. All right, next step. Notice that I still have the name of the one that I originally opened up at the top. I'm still in that one. So I saved it under a new name, but it didn't open it to edit it. So I created it under a new name. I don't want to save these changes to this. Let's open the one that I'm going to be modifying. So just a program note, keep an eye up at the top here. That's the one that you're editing. Now, another handy thing is if you open a recording that was previously trended, perhaps on another machine, it was trended on an acquisition, you're at a review station, you want to know what it was trended with, the file and its path are shown up at the top. So you can see what it was trended with. Now, if you change that, it'll store whatever you told it to do the rendering of the trends with instead. So you can change it, but it tells you what it was last done with. So, all right, enough of that. Now let's go to the Channels tab. Again, this is our trending montage here, and it's not grayed out anymore. I deleted the trend so we could select it. And there are those channels, but in that list of channels, we do not have the channels that I want, those new channels. So I'm just going to hit OK. I'm going to go back over here to the montage, and this is a trending montage, not necessarily a review montage. This says to trend these channels. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a channel, and I'm going to give it the input 1, input 2, G1, G2. For trivia fans, G1 used to be grid 1. Grids are what are on vacuum tubes, vacuum tube amplifiers. So grid 1, grid 2 was actually an input on a tube, and the name stuck around. So it's actually more modern to say input 1, input 2, but some things stay around for nostalgia purposes. So let's go ahead and pick the channels. We're going to pick FP1 to P3. There it is. There's that channel. And like we said, there's nothing being recorded there. I'm just bringing it into the trending montage and throw it over here. I'm going to insert another channel, and we'll do FP2 and P4. And we're going to try out our trends on a recording that has EEG and all those inputs. So we'll hit OK. So now we have these two channels in our trending montage. And I can drag these to whatever I want to have. So I want to save this. Save montage, leave the name the same. Warning, hey, this is used for trending. Do you want to continue? Yep. Go to trend preferences, go to channels, and with any luck, if I were to just go back and grab that montage and I scroll down here, let's see, there they are, FP1 and P3, FP2, P4. So yeah, they're there. Now, something else to keep in mind is we have channel lists, and channel lists are just a group of channels that you want to associate in some way to put into a single trend. Whether you're going to average them or do some other way of pulling them together, average is typical. For the 2 channel, well, it's just channel 1, channel 2. We're not gonna average them, so we don't need to put them in channel lists. So I'm going to hit OK, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this panel. What I'm going to duplicate this panel. Get a little clicky there. All right, we're going to duplicate this panel. And now it says 01, okay? So I'm going to rename the panel, and we're going to put it AEG to CH, just to follow the convention that was done before. You don't have to use underscores. You can use spaces. Either one is fine. If you're old school, you can use underscores. If you're new school, you can use spaces. All right. Now we have our 2 channel, in addition to these other ones. That's there. It's all the way down at the bottom. Let's see if we can change the order of these a little bit. Yeah, if we go to panel, isn't this handy? We can hit up, just keep that button over there. Now it's at the top of the list. So in P13, E2 or later, E1 as well, E1 and A2, you can go ahead and reorder the panels. The earlier versions of P13 and back to the mists of time when the trending first came out back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s. Now you can do it. So that's a good feature. Anyway, so we put it at the top of our list, and if we save it, that'll be the default panel. So whatever panel is shown when you hit save, it gets done. So I'm going to hit save. All right. Okay. So, well, let's change this because we want to have different things for our 2 channel. Now, I could just change the channel here, but here's the issue. If I do it here, it's going to change it in the other trend panel because that trend exists in other places. So what do? Well, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I just want to make a copy of this. So right-click on this. I'm going to replicate this trend. and I'm going to tell it to use this new pair of channels, and that's FP1, P3, right? Why do I do both? Because I'm going to do blue and red. I could make them all black. Well, why don't I do that? Because the other ones use the other conventions. So you can set them to any color you want. I'll show you where to do that actually while we're doing it. Let's double click or just single click on this when we go to the output. The color's there. It is a specific shade of red and blue, this one being blue for left. Specific shades of red and blue because red tends to look brighter. So they're color balanced. So that one doesn't look overwhelming compared to the other and grab your eye on, with a color preference, oh, that's a brighter color, but look at that. So these are muted, both muted in a way to be color balanced. Anyway, that's the reason I replicated it. I didn't want to have to go to other and then go to custom and then put in these specific values for that. Easier just to copy it. That applies to a lot of trends, by the way. So I got my FP1, F3. I'm going to delete this from this panel. It's still there. It's still over on the 3 channel. We still got that FP101. But on my 2 channel, FP202, FP1, FP3, there's the new one there. So this one is one rendered in black. How do I know? Because remember what it was showing before, but if you're curious, click the output tab there. It's black. I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to make a copy of this one, replicate this one, and this one I'm going to move down the list of channels here. FP2, P4. Okay. So there's one, FP1, P3, FP2, P4. Guess what? I can drag these things around. Just grab that gray control bar and move it where I want it to go. So I have FP1, P3, FP2, P4. Typical convention is left over right, but you can have any convention you want. In some places, right is blue and left is red. Again, you can use any color scheme you want. There's no right or wrong. It's just what is the most understandable, the most immediately intuitive. That's what's important. So go ahead and delete this one because we're not going to use it in this panel. So now I've got my panel. So let's summarize what we did. I just took this existing one, added FP1, P3, FP2, P4 to my trending montage and using the insert channel, and then I saved it under the trending montage name, step 1. Step 2, go to Preferences and Trend Preferences and save as, because I'm going to give this a new name. I went to Browse, and I saved this as this, FP1 to P34. Okay, saved it. Replace that. Okay, fine. Save. Then, because I still had the original one open, do I want to save it? Sure, why not? So, I want to pick the one that I'm editing. Now, it was already open. I didn't have to do that. But originally, I had that original copy. I saved it under new name. I want to modify that, so I saved it under new name, edited it, or opened it. So I can do it. Just looking up at the top, Neodraft P13E, FP12, P34. Use any name you like. But importantly, we put this in the C program data persist. So C program data persist. That's where persist saves its stuff. And Windows 7, Windows 10, the convention, Windows 8. Can't forget Windows 8, even though we never used it that much. But this is where Windows likes to keep things for users. So you don't have to be an administrator. You don't have to be a power user. Normally users, the programs can save settings, which is kind of part of the normal operation of software. So that's why we put it there. All right. So we did that. Then we went into 3-channel. We picked some of these. We replicated the trend. And why? Not just change the channel, because it'll change it wherever that trend appears elsewhere. So if you replicate it, you can tell to use a different channel. So what I did first was I duplicated the panel. Then I renamed it. I gave the name AEG2 channel, and then I replicated and just came down to this. So this one in the output, blue, this one red. You can change the color. If you want them both black, that's fine. All right. So what does it look like? Well, it's not going to look very good because those channels are open inputs on the amplifier. But I just want to make sure that we get an output on our AEG. And I'm then going to go ahead And you can see they're way off the scale here. They're way up because remember, 0 to 100 microvolts, standard scaling for AEG. Semi-logarithmic, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 50, 75, 100. Pretty clever. When they came out with the, Maynard came out with the idea of the cerebral function monitor, they scaled it that way. So you could see changes in the amplitude of the EEG when the amplitude is real low. And you can see changes in the amplitude of the EEG when the amplitude is real low. Semi-logarithmic, kind of clever. We didn't come up with it. That's been around for a long time, and that's a standard way that AEG is done. So we built a little bit of trend. Let's go through the rest of these and make sure that we're seeing good-looking trends. Yep, all looking good. Okay, so we saved it with this trend being selected. I'll go ahead and pause this. We saved it with this trend. And so this will be the default trend that shows up when you open the software. Something else to keep in mind, I'd set a baseline. When I was looking at the versus baseline, I set a baseline to using. I don't want to save the baseline with this trend settings file, so I'm just going to delete this baseline. So no baselines, because you don't want a baseline stuck into your MMX file. Those are patient or recording specific. So done that, save, okay, close. I want to save those changes, sure. And then I'm going to go back here to trend preferences. I can select that template file. There it is. Okay. And see it defaults set at 2 channel. Easy. Now, I did a lot of explaining of why and the side issues and all that, but really the process of modifying that can be done in about 4 or 5 minutes tops. So how do we check this thing out? All right, now I've got this 1020 EEG recording here. I'm going to open it up. And it's one of our standard training files. It's a 15-minute recording with some spike wave seizures in it. And I'm going to just roll forward in this. I want to pick that trending montage. There it is, trend, Neo, BP, and Ref. And why didn't I leave it in the list? Because I don't want this to be inadvertently modified. It has a job to do. And so there's that seizure there. We're looking at 20 seconds of EEG, as we would with typically with neonates. We can change that. But yeah, you can see that seizure there. So let's see what happens when we do the trending. The process. And again, this is a full 1020 EEG. So we expect the AEEG to start out at typical amplitudes. And you can see it making its way down into a normal range. Let's go ahead and change the time scale here from 2 hours. We'll go down to 30 minutes. This is not a long recording. And so this is doing what we would expect. Again, you could look at any montage you want during the trending. So the trending montage is just used by the trends to do its calculations. It tells it what to perform these calculations on. Looks like it's working. We can go ahead and pause that. Let's page through some of our other trend panels. Our 3 channel is good. Our 11 channel is good. We don't have an FC-CZ in this particular recording. And in addition to that, CZ is flashing because CZ is the reference on this particular recording. So that's okay. We can go to the other one where it actually does have an FC to see that it's populating those channels. But if the channel's missing, that's where you get a question mark. There's no FC in this recording. See, it's missing over in the head snap there. All right, go to comprehensive. We go to versus baseline. It's blank because there's no baseline. I can add a baseline if I want to. The reason there's no baseline, by the way, in this particular recording, if we go to preferences, trend preferences, baseline, starts the search at 300 seconds in, picks a 600-second segment, and if there's a seizure detection during that, or bad electrodes during that, enough bad electrodes, it's not going to mark that baseline. And in this recording, they had seizures right off the bat, so it didn't set a baseline. It wants to wait until things settle down a bit before it sets a baseline, because if you have lots of variation in the baseline, as they used to say in the old days back in the chemistry, clinical chemistry, that you could ride a horse through those ranges. So you want a baseline that It doesn't have a tremendous amount of variation because otherwise nothing's going to vary much from that. Getting off the subject. So I'm going to drop the baseline here just as a functional check. And we'll do it in a short, stable part of stuff. And we'll just call it first. I'm not saving this part of the MMX, just dropping the baseline. That's working fine. You know, these left and right hemisphere, let's see, bipolar. These look like they're redundant. So if you see something in your trend layout, like, yeah, I don't know that that should be in there. I'm going to go ahead and change it. Well, you can do that. That's the point of doing this check of the settings. I'm going to open up our draft in the template monitoring modify mode because that's where we can save changes. I'm going to switch over to this versus baseline comprehensive. I'm going to get rid of these two trends that appear to be extra. All right, delete selected. Yeah, FFT spectrogram left and right. Okay, got that out of there. I think everything else looked good. I'm going to set this back because I want it to be my default. Trend preferences, save, okay, close. I want to save those changes yet. Now this one, why didn't it show up on this when I closed the template monitoring mode? It's because it still has the other one in memory. It still has it saved. It's still using it. I didn't tell it to use the edited one. So I click Trend Preferences, select the template file, go back into here, and it sets it back to the default, which is what it should do. Versus baseline comprehensive, we're going to see those left and right there. Why is there no baseline? Because I don't want a baseline in the MMX file. I want that. That's something that I set for this recording. I'm going to drop it between those seizures because I don't want the seizures in that. Add baseline. I'm just going to call it first. There it is. Looking good. Versus baseline FFT by channel. Again, I don't have an FZ on this recording. That's okay. Suppression ratio. Yep. Working. Everything looks functionally good. So this is a good starting point. You can put it on your machines. You can check it out. Run some recordings after the fact and make sure everything looks the way you want. Now, these things are, whenever we make modifications to a trend setup, it's a starting point. Then the conversation continues. This way, when we're talking with you about what to do with the trends next, we're starting from a nice point where a lot of it's done. You can see what's involved with creating these changes, and then you know, oh, well, I can have it be a different color. I can include different types of trends in that panel. I can have a default panel on this machine at the bedside, let's say, and I can have a different trend panel that I will use at the review station. You know, these are all valid things to do. So with that, thank you for listening. Again, this is Michael Guest, VP of Research and Clinical Applications for Persyst Development. This has been an ad hoc screencast on how to do something that has caveats, but as far as that you have structure, that if you're going to create a trend, the trend uses a trend template. That trend template trends channels that are in the trending montage, and those channel pairs should be in the trending montage. So how do I know they're in the trending montage? We added them. That FP1 to P3, FP2 to P4, I added those in. Why did I add it rather than just creating a trend settings that has only those channels? It's because there's a reasonable chance, this is not uncommon, that in some applications for neonate, they may just put on 2 channels to get started. They may decide to add channels later in a standard double distance neonatal electrode application or not. And so what this allows us to do is to customize from there. If they're going to just stop with FP1, P3, FP2, P4 in that application for those machines, that's fine. We can get rid of the other stuff. If we may be using those 2 channel and then may go to a full double distance neonatal application for some patients, it's there. You can just switch the trend panel. You don't have to reconfigure. And so, and at the bedside, you could have a simple 2-channel AEEG, even if it has the additional electrodes, and then for review, you can have the additional channels available for that. That is the rationale for doing it. Again, Persyst has a lot of flexibility in how it can be configured. So if there's something special that you want to do, please let us know, because as the practitioner, as a physician, the decision is yours. Thanks so much. Stay well, and thank you for listening.